Ever since launching his disastrous invasion of Ukraine, Putin has found himself more and more isolated. He incinerated Russia's European export markets overnight. Gas exports to Europe, Russia's main source of state revenue, have been completely shut down. Sanctions have drastically impaired trade between Russia and the EU. With those markets drying up quickly, Putin is making a mad dash for Africa and Asia. The pivot to Africa especially is heating up. Putin recently announced that he has prioritized relations with African countries. African News reported this, quote, Mr. Putin believed that Russia, like Africa, defends traditional moral values by resisting the neo-colonial ideology imposed from abroad. He also promised to supply the neediest African countries with cereals if the important agreement on Ukrainian exports was not renewed in 2 months. According to Mr. Putin, Russia plans to increase cooperation with African countries in the field of energy, medicine, and to double the quotas of African students in Russian university. Against the backdrop of Western sanctions linked to its offensive in Ukraine, Moscow is currently seeking support in Asia and Africa, where many states have not openly condemned the Russian military intervention. Russia had already multiplied initiatives on the African continent in recent years aimed at posing as an alternative to the former colonial powers. Putin has launched a charm offensive in Africa to win over the dark masses to his side. Quote, in less than a month, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited 7 African countries in 2 trips to the continent. With this flurry of diplomatic activity, Moscow has tried to promote its own narrative on the war in Ukraine and related changes on the international stage to the global south. In reality, these efforts are not as much about creating a second front against the West in Africa as they are about Russia seeking to substitute, at least symbolically, the long-standing formats of cooperation with the post-Soviet space decimated by the invasion of Ukraine. Numerous African countries, nursing old grudges and grievances against Europe for colonialism, have sided with Russia in its brutal war against Ukraine. Quote, and South Africa, as well as 5 other liberation movements in Southern Africa, have historical ties with the former Soviet Union, an analyst tells RFI. All 6 abstained in the vote. Tanzania's Chama Cha Mapinduzi ruling party and the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, Namibia's ruling SWAPO Party, and ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe were all based on socialist or communist doctrine, and a number of these movements received help from the Soviet Union. For its part, Angola used Russian arms to gain independence from Portugal in 1975, and its flag features a Russian AK-47. South Africa's African National Congress ruling party also gained support from the USSR during the anti-apartheid struggle. Professor Adita Bojanowski noted the searing hypocrisy of Vladimir Putin preaching against Western colonialism while he occupies and annexes the territory of Ukraine. Quote, while denying the reality of Russia's own imperialism, Putin now exploits the colonial wounds of Asia, Africa, and the Americas to cast Russia as the global champion of anti-colonialism. This anti-colonialism, like the Soviet one before it, has become a tool in the Kremlin's well-funded repertoire of soft power. In a transparent attempt to break Russia's international isolation, Putin is appealing to the countries of the so-called Global South to join Russia's anti-colonial crusade against their former Western colonizers, purportedly headed by the satanic hegemon-in-chief, the USA. It is not a coincidence that the various derivations of the word colonialism appear 13 times in Putin's 37-minute speech. Clearly signaling toward the formerly colonized non-West, Putin touts the Soviet Union's supposedly anti-colonial and anti-racist tradition. While the policies he describes did exist, they were embedded in Cold War rivalries that compromised their purported virtuousness. The Soviet Union, like the Tsarist Russian Empire before it, protested all colonialisms and racisms other than its own. The decolonization of former Western empires mattered to the Soviets primarily as a tool to diminish their geopolitical rivals' power. The South African radical Julius Malema, who's known for his frequent exhortations to kill white Boers, made it clear his sympathies lie with Russia.
EFF leader Julius Malema says that Russia gave South Africa support during the liberation struggle in the country by providing arms, money, and education. Russia and Ukraine have been at war for over 3 weeks, with the latter receiving military and monetary support from its allies, the US and NATO. While the South African government has taken a neutral stance in the conflict, urging peace, Malema is unequivocal.
We are here to say to NATO, we are here to say to America, we are not with you. We are with Russia. And today we want to say to Russia, thank you for being there when it was not fashionable to be there.
It makes sense that many bloodthirsty Africans see this war as revenge against the white West for perceived past injustices. Collective guilt-tripping is applied to whites, and they view Putin and Russia as a vehicle for destruction to be rained upon Europe. Putin has gleefully trotted out non-white grievances against whites over the years to use as a psychological weapon against the West.
When Europeans arrived in America, that was the first thing they did. And you have to be honest about it. There are not so many stories like that in human history. Then there was slavery, and that's something that's deeply ingrained in America. In his memoirs, US Secretary of State Colin Powell revealed how hard it was for him as a black man, how hard it was for him to live with other people staring at you. It means this mentality has taken root in the hearts and minds of the people, and is likely to still be there.
Что касается американского истеблишмента, не американского народа в целом, там главным образом очень много честных, порядочных, душевных людей, которые хотят жить с нами в мире и дружбе. Мы знаем об этом и дорожим этим, и будем на них опираться в будущем. Но что касается американского истеблишмента, то руководящего правящего класса, то его сознание складывалось в известных и довольно непростых условиях. Ведь освоение европейцами американского континента было связано с истреблением местного населения, с геноцидом, как сегодня говорят, прямым геноцидом индейских племен. Затем последовал очень жесткий, большой, тяжелый период рабства, рабовладения, очень жестокий. И все это идет по истории, до сегодняшнего дня сопровождает жизнь Соединенных Штатов. Иначе откуда взялось бы движение Black Lives Matter? Жизни черных имеют значение. До сих пор афроамериканцы сталкиваются с несправедливостью и истреблением.
Конечно, необратимы. И как на национальном, так и на глобальном уровне идет выработка основ, принципов гармоничного, более справедливого, социально ориентированного и безопасного миропорядка, альтернативного существующему или, можно сказать, существовавшему до сих пор однополярному мироустройству, которое по своему характеру, безусловно, становится тормозом для развития цивилизации. Модель тотального доминирования так называемого «золотого миллиарда» несправедлива. Ну почему вот этот золотой миллиард из всего населения планеты, почему он должен доминировать над всеми, навязывать свои правила поведения, основанные на иллюзии исключительность? Она делит народы на первый и второй сорт, а потому является российской и неоколониальной по сути своей. А лежащая в ее основе глобалистская, якобы либеральная идеология все больше приобретает черты тоталитаризма, сдерживая творческий поиск, свободное историческое созидание. Складывается впечатление, что Запад просто не может предложить миру свою модель будущего. Да, конечно, этот золотой миллиард не случайно стал золотым. Добился очень многого. Но не только занял свои такие позиции благодаря каким-то реализованным идеям. В значительной степени он занял свои позиции за счет грабежа других народов. И в Азии, и в Африке. Ну как же, так и было. Индию он сколько грабили. Поэтому и сегодня элиты этого золотого миллиарда панически боятся, что другие центры мирового развития могут представить свои варианты развития. Но как бы западные и так называемые наднациональные элиты не стремились сохранить существующий порядок вещей, наступает все-таки новая эпоха, новый этап в мировой истории. И только подлинно суверенные государства могут обеспечить высокую динамику роста, стать примером для других в стандартах и качестве жизни людей, в защите традиционных ценностей и высоких гуманистических идеалов.
This is all part and parcel of the Kremlin's dirty war to undermine Western states. Putin sees black Africans and black Americans as pawns in his great game of sowing discord in Western rival states, with the intention of breaking them apart from within. He expounded on his fondness for the black struggle in America in a 2020 interview, excerpts of which were published in Newsweek. Quote, Russian President Vladimir Putin has attempted to mark a positive resemblance between Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden and Soviet communists in a wide-ranging interview with the Россия TV channel. Putin linked Biden to communist ideology during the interview, while Putin, a former party member, KGB colonel, and intelligence operative, made the comparison in positive terms. The Democrat Party is traditionally closer to the so-called liberal values, closer to social democratic ideas, Putin said, and it was from the social democratic environment that the Communist Party evolved. After all, I was a member of the Soviet Communist Party for nearly 20 years, Putin added. I was a rank-and-file member, but it can be said that I believed in the party's ideas. I still like many of these left-wing values, equality and fraternity. What is bad about them? In fact, they are akin to Christian values. Yes, they are difficult to implement, but they are very attractive nevertheless. In other words, this can be seen as an ideological basis for developing contacts with the Democratic representative. Putin also reminisced on the Soviet Union's rhetorical support for African American civil rights struggle. Putin said black Americans, quote, constitute a stable electorate in favor of the Democrats. The Soviet Union also supported the African Americans movement for their legitimate rights, he said. Back in the 1930s, communist international leaders wrote that both black and white workers had a common enemy, imperialism and capitalism. They also wrote that these people could become the most effective group in the future revolutionary battle. So this is something that can be seen to a degree as common values, if not a unifying agent for us, Putin said. People of my generation remember a time when huge portraits of Angela Davis, a member of the U.S. Communist Party and an ardent fighter for the rights of African Americans, were on view around the Soviet Union. Angela Davis was a radical black communist who was honored by the Soviet Union, East Germany, and Cuba, and whose example inspired BLM. Black power activist Assata Shakur, who was involved in the murder of a U.S. state trooper in 1973, broke out of jail and fled to Cuba, where she has been harbored ever since by the anti-white communist regime of Fidel and brother Raul Castro. Putin's support for black power is not totally insincere, though. Here he is granting citizenship to the African-American boxer Roy Jones Jr.
Thanks, sir. All right. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Очень рад вас видеть. Как вы здесь оказались в Крыму?
How did you happen to be here in Crimea?
Just come with Vlad all the time. We do a lot of boxing business together. So I can't.
Oh, that's fierce. Well, you're a musician. And I hope you will do business here in Russia as well very successfully.
That's why I want to come here. That's why I'm also here, because I want to ask you about maybe having a passport to go back and forth so that I can do business here, because all of the people here seem to love Roy Jones Jr. And I love when people love me.
Ваше имя очень хорошо известно среди любителей спорта и любителей бокса в России.
Your name is very well famous with the lovers of sport and boxing, particularly in Russia.
И если вы значительную часть своей жизни намерены связать с деятельностью в России, то, конечно, мы будем рады и с удовольствием выполним вашу просьбу по поводу получения российского паспорта, российского гражданства.
If you're planning to spend a lot of your time here in Russia, we'll happily satisfy your request.
Thank you.
Russian intelligence is still supporting black separatists in America, just as the Soviet Union did. The Atlanta Journal reported, quote, the U.S. Department of Justice has connected the Black Hammer Party, a black-led radical group based in Atlanta, to an alleged Russian plot to sow discord in the United States, according to a newly unsealed federal indictment. The department announced Friday that Alexander Viktorovich Ivanov, a Russian national with Kremlin connections, was secretly funding fringe political groups in Georgia, Florida, and California, directing them to, quote, publish pro-Russian propaganda, as well as other information designed to cause dissension in the United States and to promote secessionist ideologies. If you thought that the relationship between foreign and domestic communists ended in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed, you'd be mistaken. Russia and its allies are picking up right where Gorbachev, Khrushchev, and Brezhnev left off. Breitbart reported that BLM co-founder Opal Tometi, quote, has a long history of supporting Venezuelan socialist dictator Nicolas Maduro and met with him at a 2015 conference in Harlem, New York. When you look into so-called accelerationist cosplay neo-Nazis, you often find a Russian connection too. It makes sense why Russian intelligence would be interested in such people. Ronaldo Nazzaro, founder of neo-Nazi cosplay group The Base, whose members have been linked to murders in the US, has a Russian wife, lives in Russia, and is seen here with a Putin t-shirt. The BBC reported, quote, we traced Nazzaro and his wife to an upmarket property in central St. Petersburg purchased in her name in July 2018, the same month to which the FBI dates the creation of The Base. This all fits neatly into the geopolitical strategy of Alexander Dugin, a Russian Eurasianist ideologue who advocates backing any and all variations of separatism in Western countries in order to destabilize and break them apart, so that Russia can then march into Eastern Europe and erect its lost empire without opposition. Dugin has close ties to the dissident right via the French New Right. He wrote in his 1997 strategy book Foundations of Geopolitics that Russia should, quote, sponsor all kinds of separatism and ethnic, social, and racial conflicts, actively supporting all dissident movements, extremist, racist, and sectarian, thus destabilizing internal political processes in the US. It would also make sense simultaneously to support isolationist tendencies in American politics. This is all designed to introduce geopolitical disorder into internal American activity, he said. Dugin doesn't mince his words when spewing out his genocidal, violent hate fantasies against the collective West. He said this, quote, the West is geographical antichrist. The West should pay for everything. It would be best to settle him with Chinese, Tatars, Muslims, all this Eurasian nomadism. The West is dead land. He will revive only when the Cossacks settle him, Tajiks, Kazakhs. They will bring life with them, bring smells. He went on to say this, quote, Europe today has a choice, Eurasianism or Atlanticism. Either he will go with Russia or America. If the European New Right chooses us, that is the barbaric element, it must therefore adopt our methods of action. You have to organize attacks, deal with sabotage, set fire to and blow up bridges. And what does the New Right do? She turned into an intellectual sect. For 30 years, overweight and gray-haired gentlemen have gathered at seminars and beat the foam. Of course you have to read books, but that is not enough. You need to create guerrilla. If you are against the New World Order, then take a knife, put on a mask, leave the house in the evening, and kill at least one Yankee. That is why the New Left, Red Brigades, and Rote Army faction are so close to me. Our task is not limited to culture. Our task is to make real revolution. He said, "I'm a supporter of blacks, white civilization, their cultural values, false dehumanizing model of the world built by them did not pay off. Everything goes to the beginning of the anti-white pogroms on a planetary scale. Russia is saved only by the fact that we are not pure white." Dugin is so enamored with African blacks that he went on to make a defense of cannibalism as practiced in West Africa, stating, "There are African tribes in West Atlantic shore who breed human slaves to eat them. I find it perfectly reasonable and fully responsible." So now it starts to make sense why Russia today hosts everything from Marxists to libertarians, even far-right types who have some kind of beef with their government, and why Russian intelligence was behind the scenes helping organize the California secession movement in the US and the Catalonian secession movement in Spain. But Russian far-right types are themselves arrested in Russia as opponents of Putin's multicultural worldview. Both Dugin and Putin subscribe to the Eurasianist idea of imperialist cultural Lebensraum, not racial, but cultural, which is why they assert a multicultural identity for Russians as they seek to wipe out Eastern European ethnic groups like Ukrainians, who have a strong national identity and resist their Eurasian agenda.
Baltic Way says if a group of blacks move to Russia, learn Russian, become Orthodox, and say they are Russian, would you accept them as Russian?
Yes, exactly, absolutely, absolutely. The Russian is about heart, not about the skin, about the center, not about surface.
The latest program to cancel world literature was conducted by the Nazis in Germany 90 years ago. We remember that footage when they were burning books. It's impossible to imagine such a thing in our country, and we're insured against this thanks to our culture. And it's inseparable for us from our motherland, from Russia, where there is no place for ethnic intolerance, where for centuries representatives from dozens of ethnic groups have been living together, and cultural diversity is the pride of our society, the strength and priority of our state.
Blew himself up with a grenade, and the fighters who surrounded him, because he knew who he was dealing with. He was dealing with Nazis who abuse people. I'm a Russian person, and I see this heroism who is from somebody who is from Dagestan, and when I talk about other ethnic groups, I say I'm Chechen, I'm Ossetin, I'm Mordvin, and so on. All these 300 nationalities, ethnic groups that live in the territory of Russia. And I'm proud that I'm part of this world, part of this mighty, strong, multicultural state of Russia.
Моя мама чукчанка, папа русский, дедушка чукча, а бабушка моя украинка.
Я чукчанка.
Я калмык.
Я азербайджанка.
Я эскимос.
Я мордовка.
Я
юкагирка. Мы эвены.
Я еврей.
Я кореянка.
Я украинец. Я бурят. И я русский.
Я карачаевка.
Я ингуш.
Я армянка.
Русские! Наша страна Россия! Путин наш президент!